Good morning, good morning. This morning, the topic of my talk is guides and ghosts. Or perhaps I should have said ghosts and guides. G and G anyway. So I'd had an email from someone who wanted to know about guides. And at the time I wrote back and said, I don't know a lot about guides and I don't know if it's a topic I should speak on. And then I actually caught something that I had recorded as I was looking through some old YouTube entries where I did speak about guides and attachments and other things at a I think it was a spring festival of awareness I was at several years ago, many years ago actually now. And so on, I thought about that, and I also thought that I would talk a little bit about ghosts. So last week in my talk, I mentioned the book, The Education of Oversoul 7 by Jane Roberts. Now, that book at the time, which was probably in the 1980s that I read it, it taught me mostly and laid the groundwork for me about how guides work. And she wrote 3 books in the series. I found the very first one of the education, the first one was the most beneficial to me because they talked about how and as I said, I think I said this last week, but I'm going to repeat it, is that this Oversoul 7, of which the book is mainly about, is a guide in training. And he has a teacher, and his teacher's name is Cypress. Well, when we're learning things, we always get a little, we make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we come to understand what is good, and what isn't good. So Cypress is not all the time, but constantly needing to remind him about certain things about being a guide. Non-interference was one. One was not getting too caught up in one person's life rather than the other people's lives. So there are all these things that go on with Dear Oversoul 7. Now, I have a story that works in with that to prove that fact. Not that many years ago, probably 6 or so, one of the things I had matured into was channeling other people's guides for them. Often when you go to a channeling session, they channel their guide and the guide gives the message. For some reason, I forget, and I do know how it happened, but it happened way, way back many years ago. I began to channel other people's guides for them. And I really like this because it's personal. And even though messages often relate to everybody, it's more personal. It's your guide talking to you and answering your question or questions. The story that I want to show that how what Cypress was dealing with Oversoul 7. A lady had brought a friend who was visiting her that wanted a channeling session, and a couple of other people came in as well that had been asking for them. And so we went around everybody else, and then we finally came to this person that has traveled quite a distance to visit her friend and was wondering, I'm sure, what on earth she got herself into. So, excuse me, and this guide comes in. Now, I just want to put a little thing in here. I have had guides come in and say, this is my first time of doing this, and I'm, and to getting used to using my voice and all that kind of stuff. So I've had that before. This person did not say anything like this, but basically verbally began to attack this poor lady. Now, my guide at the time, Rama, he jerked this person right out of me because that's one thing we do not stand for. We do not stand for any kind of abuse in any way, shape, or form. So the guide was, and when that happens, it always leaves me a little rocked. And through Rama talking to me now, sort of saying, just hold on a sec. His teacher is coming. And it's so funny because sometimes I've seen this a couple of times. You just kind of get this little, I see this little picture in a very tiny little thing running like crazy. And sort of came into our sphere of influence, took a big breath, and then came in to be able to use my voice. And he apologized. He said he was busy with something else, so he sent his trainee to come and speak. But what was interesting for me because I'm not a trance medium. I always like to know what's going on that are using my voice. I like to know what's going on. And I have come to understand and learn a great deal from this over the years. This man apologized to the lady, explained why, as I just said, and then basically gave the same message that the new guide was done, but in a kind and gentle way. But the meaning was exactly the same. So what I want you to understand is two things. One is everything is energy. Everything has a vibration or a frequency, including guides. So you have guides that are learning. You have guides that like to do certain jobs. I've had that because I've had guides that worked with me over the year, even though I wasn't a real big guide person and never really referred too much to my guides till Rama came on the scene. And then he kind of demanded that. He was a very different guide, very powerful guide. And the whole element here is to recognize that as we in our physical bodies have a frequency, so does guides. The only difference with a person, as we will I'm talking about ghosts eventually, but only difference between a person live and dead, we'll say, is the vibration, is that we alive are in a physical body. But people, when they pass over, are still alive. They just don't have a physical body. But their vibration. Now, I do know I have here in my notes that I wrote down about something about that. I said, I went in here. I did write this little booklet called The Ghost I Took Home, which has a lot of ghost busting stories in that I did. And one part of it I write here. I put the page number in. I put on page 26 of my book, The Ghost I Took Home and Other Ghost Busting Stories. And this is what I wrote. Spirituality, I often explain this way. Water finds its own level. It cannot run uphill. The same thing is with our own spiritual growth. We find our own level as to where we are comfortable with accepting and receiving love. And that's the key, to accept and receive love. I go on in another part. I believe that each one of us needs to be aware of how loved and how important and how special and unique we truly are. It is time to learn how, when you leave your physical body and pass to the other side, you embrace the light of love which comes for you. Know how necessary it is to let go of anything you are holding onto and receive the wonderful feeling of truly belonging. To know you are not judged, rather you are loved and accepted completely. And the way I can sort of say how this is, have you ever been to a party or an event where you felt like a fish out of water, like you didn't really relate to these people? That's about how the spiritual level grows. If you're at if you go to the level, and that's why in another book that was very, very important to me, and I'm trying to remember the name of it at the moment, and it was a story that was written after the Second World War, where a man began to travel astrally to look for his brother who had passed over. And he went into all different things. And this is another book that played a big part to me, which name evades me at the moment, but Peter Richelieu wrote it. I know that. And I'll probably remember it as soon as I'm off this show. And so what he found was the Buddhists were in one part, the Christians were in another, the Muslims were in another, the metaphysics physicians like me were another. In other words, we found our own place. And once he found his brother who was busy partying, which is actually quite something that often people do have had hard lives, they go play, which my daddy did when he went over. Then where my mom went and did a lot of education and learning, because she figured I was going to have to do it anyway, I might as well do it now. Now, the interesting element here is that this gentleman who writes the book went on and on and on and on up into different spheres and in different ways and different elements. And he learned so many things. And I remember the one part that really struck me was when he got up to where there was the celestial choirs. And I've heard these choirs sing, and they're phenomenal. Nothing in our physical plane matches it. And people talk about that at times. Musicians hear it, or they feel it, or they feel the vibration of it, and they do their best to represent that. So I want you to just be aware there's levels, and that's part of our reincarnational element, because we're always working to understand and be able to accept love. And so what a guide was, we'll finish up with kind of a little bit more about guides, because guides are there to guide us, not to tell us what to do, but to guide. And that's what I have found over all the years of being in doing the channeling for other people, is they're very philosophical. And what I find in the philosophy element, sometimes their metaphors were so good. And unfortunately, I didn't write them down, so I didn't remember them. But the metaphors of life and what and how. And that's why when we sit as a group in a channeling session that I used to do fairly regularly, is that we all came to learn and understand. We all came to learn and understand the philosophy of life. Because guides that do come in, they're usually have evolved to some point. And even if they're beginning, like as I said, one came in and said, look, this is the first time I've done this, I'm getting used to using the voice, and gave a lovely message to the person he was working with. Most people have more than one guide. Often, many of us have many. I know I've had guides that help me write, that help me. Sometimes I call on them when I'm driving. Sometimes I call on when I'm speaking. I know that there's certain ones I'm very familiar with. Some I don't know their names. They just know they're there. And then there's some like Rama who came in. I was actually taken and introduced to Rama and being told he was going to be my guide, and he was for 20 odd years. And then I got ill, couldn't work, and he's got lots to do. And I'll tell you an interesting story about Rama. My daughter and I, with my friend Holly, we went to Lourdes. And as we walked on, there was a rainy, wet day, which often isn't there. And I looked at this big church and everything, and I said, oh, we got to go up there, which it was the very top part of it where they had, like it became like more like a little chapel rather than a big, big church. And each one of us sat in a different pew, and each one of us had a different experience there. Well, my experience was this. I closed my eyes and I looked sort of in my third eye, you might say, and there was Mary, there was Jesus, and there was Rama. And my first report was, Rama, what are you doing here? And Mary said to me, oh, why would he not be here? Everyone is one of my children. And at that point, that made my sense of my judgments of where our placement is, what our placement is. A number of years later, I lost a little granddaughter, and I went, at that point I was doing quite a bit of work with Mary, and I went and I said, can you do anything about my granddaughter? And she said, no, that's Jesus's department. Once she's come over, I'll look after her. That's my area. And I found it really interesting that all of a sudden I began to see how we can pray to something that maybe that is not their quote area, how things work. So at the time I was a little upset about all this, and I kind of withdrew on a few levels. But at the same point, I really recognize everything is a vibration. And as you have your work that you do in your world, and as I have my work as I do in my world, and I often wonder, what am I going to do in my next, as I'm getting near the end of my kind of years. I mean, how many more do I have left? Hopefully quite a few yet. But what am I going to be doing, and where am I going? What's my vibration going to be at that point? Because the moment of death is an important point. And so guides are there to support, to inspire, and if you ever find you have a guide that's telling you to do this, that, or the other, there's something not right with that. I probably at some point talked about how high cells can start doing that too, and it's not the best placement to be as to where it is. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything that I have left out on that part. I don't think so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we become ghosts. Now, because I was getting ready to do this, I went and dug out my booklet, The Ghost I Took Home, which is a true story, actually, and then the other ghost stories. And what amazed me is I had written something in front of it, which I'm going to read to you, that's a kind of surprised me because I don't remember writing it. And excuse me, I've got a bit of a, I don't want to say it's a cold, but I got a drippy nose and a little bit of a rough throat. So that's, so if you see me wiping my nose, that's what that's all about. So this is what I wrote in the front of my ghost busting book. The moment arrives. It is time to die. A light appears, warm, all loving, encompassing, enveloping. All you have to do is surrender. Let go of the memories, the pain, the guilt, the regrets, the anger, frustrations, shame, all of it. That is all. Relax. Enjoy the love, the peace the light brings. Time passes. You did not let go. You did not surrender. You missed it. Perhaps you never noticed the light because you were caught up in the events happening. Your daughter crying, your car ruined, the physical pain so real and absorbing. Whatever, the moment has passed. Time passes. You are aware of your surroundings, but what you are not aware of is that you have died. You are a ghost. Time keeps on going by. You become upset, angry. No one is talking to you. They ignore you. They are in your house, but they keep on ignoring you. You get angrier and angrier. Then, finally, someone calls me, the Ghostbuster, and I understand. I come, I talk with you, I bring the light to you. You may go easily, or I may need to reassure you that all your guilt and regret are not important. I will show you how the light truly loves you no matter what. Originally, you missed the bus, the light, and I bring the light back for you. You are released. I am a Ghostbuster. When I read that, I couldn't put it more succinctly today than that, because that's what happens so often. And so many times when I was doing a lot of that work, I would sit down and make contact. And that's when I really began to learn about frozen memories techniques that I use later. I began to become, I actually got a call rather than a Ghostbuster, was a ghost therapist. I was connecting them with the light, was like, and it was like that. It was bringing the light back to them and then having them let go whatever it was they were holding on to. The guilt, the regret, are really, they're the really ones that hold us. And that's why you'll hear people like myself say, it is really important to do the releasing work, the transformation work, so that you can be in the present and move into that love space that's there, to grow that. That's why it is so, so important. So when that moment comes, you're able to put aside everything and surrender. Now, I have to admit, when people told me first about surrendering, I was like, no way, not doing that. I was like, you know, they all say you get converted. Well, I got converted to surrendering several times in my life. As each time I had to let go more stuff. I had to let go of things I held on to. Could be, some of them were beliefs, some of them were attitudes, some were judgments, some were just fear of, oh my God, I'm not perfect or whatever at the time. But the reality is, we know one thing. They say death in Texas. Well, we know death. Texas people can avoid if they know what they're doing. But you're not death. Eventually, you have to leave your body. You have to come into that realm and begin to grow more, to begin to do more things, begin to be much more aware of what you're doing and where you're going and how it's going to be. And so that is the exciting part, is because we are given this opportunity throughout this life to begin to clear up. Now, how do I know all this stuff? Is because I was first introduced to past life regression very early in, way back. I'm trying to think, it's probably the 1970s, end of 1970s, early 1980s anyway. And that began to have me be aware of the light when I finally got into that. By the way, the first past life regressions I did, they were all, I called them sightseeing. I went and I looked and I discovered, but I didn't really work with the death process. The teachers that I had 2 major teachers around past life regressions, 2 different techniques. They did not really talk about that. They were just thankful that, hey, they have this technique where you can see yourself in another time and place. But then as everything came together and I realized that the death process was the major key, I used to basically have people come into their lives and go to the last day, because in the last day you could see the whole life. You could see the decisions you made, what you're hanging on to, and especially the guilt, the regret, strong emotions like hate, jealousy, things that really hold you and bind you up. And when you bring the light in and you surrender that, then you can actually transcend to a different vibration than you would. So it was like setting free these past lives. That's where I really began. I didn't do any, at that point, I didn't even know that I could do any ghost busting work. And in my book, I talk about the first thing that happened. It happened actually when we moved to one of the houses and I saw this young girl in my house. And I said, again, ignorance on my part, I said, what are you doing here? This is my house. Go, get going. Then I found out this young girl had died in the basement suite. And I felt a little upset about that years later when I realized all I had to do was bring light to her, but I didn't know at that time. Same thing happened. My daughter moved in with a boyfriend in a house down the road, and she calls me because things had been going missing, and they finally had taken her makeup, just putting makeup on. She put it down and turned around, and it had gone. And then she finally phoned up and said, "You get down here now. You got to figure out what's going on here. We're losing things." Anyway, I sat down, and that's where I talked about why I talked about you're in my house, because this man had died in the house many years previously and never made his transition. And he was really angry. These people kept coming into his home. So he was taking things, and it takes a lot of energy to take something from the physical out of the physical. Sat down and I talked to him, and I still didn't know about light yet. And well, I knew a little bit about it, I guess, but I said to him, I really want you to bring everything back. And do you know that everything that had been taken except one object, and I don't think he took it, I think it just happened that they lost it, was returned. That was my beginning of ghost busting, which went on to all sorts of various stories, which is in my book. I really just see that whether we're talking to guides, whether we're talking to people that have passed over, because, I should mention this, just had a thought, because it has happened. Very often, a grandmother in particular, I know one grandmother was one of my students' guides. Some times you do have a family member that will come and be your guide. That's what they choose to do, to look after you. And when I say look after you, again, it's guiding you. It's to be there as a reference. It's to be there to remind you that you're loved, that you're precious, that you're important. All of those things. And the key to also know, they're there to help you prepare to get to that place of when it is your time to leave, you can make that transition and you do not become a ghost. And the ghosts are only because they missed the point. Now, there was a movie made years ago, Robert Downey Jr. was in it. And he was the bus driver of the bus that went around and picked up people. And I can't remember the whole movie. But, you know, we probably all saw Ghost. Those of us that are older certainly saw the movie Ghost. And a lot of that was very accurate, incredibly accurate. But this one about the bus picking people up, and that's why I made the reference about you missed the bus. Because if you're not ready, because somebody will come for you, somebody will be there for you, and always there is a light. Now, I raised my children from when they were really little to know that at every vibrational level, there are guides that walk through with light, with a lantern, like a light. And that comes from my knowing of the tarot and the hermit. And I said, if ever you think you're dead, look for the light. So when my daughter last year made her transition, was it last? Yeah, it was last year. I can't even remember now. It's time. It could be 2 years ago. No, it was 1 year ago. It'll be 2 years come July. I know that she knows and knew, and she did know to look for the light. And I know that's what happened. So she went into the light. And sometimes it's easier to deal with things over there than it is here when you're bound with all sorts of physicalities and stuff like that. I just feel that we really need to know that, again, I go back to that pretty well opening statement, is to remember everything is an energy. And that love in this planet, when I'm always talking about this planet, is the importance of incorporating that love into your life, to allow it to be, so that whether you become a guide or whether you become a reincarnated to continue your journey of learning and understanding, because that's the unknown. What are we going to do next? But it's also really exciting and relating to the life. I have some people online here, and if there is a question you'd like to ask, please unmute yourself and state it, and I'll do the best I can to answer it. Shannon, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much. That was really good. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about how guides do their guiding, basically. Do they organize certain situations in your life? Do they bring certain people into your life? Could you maybe just like give an example of the ways in which guides work to guide you?
Well, basically, one of the things that I was saying is they're there to support you and inspire you. They're not there to interfere. So really what you're talking about is how when life seems to work, is that's what you're creating.
Okay.
You're creating
like synchronicity, like when you find yourself in a really synchronicity situation, or things are starting to line up, or...
Yes.
So that's not your guides?
No, not usually, not in a sense. A lot of people will say yes. I'm saying not necessarily at all, because they're not supposed to interfere. Their job is not to interfere. Their job is to support. But what you've got to recognize is your power to create. Because when you're clear about the path that you want, or the lifestyle that you want and what you want, those things will, that synchronicity, as you call it, will occur and happen. Because that's your power. That's the essence of who you are. And when you're not double thinking yourself, when you're not questioning, I know some people, do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do the other? Well, that's pretty confusing. So the energy that does work with you to create, which is that love energy, that doesn't always know what it's supposed to bring you. So it can bring more confusion. But the clearer you are here, the clearer you are in your heart, then it becomes easier. And it's also easier for the guides to I'm going to say inspire you and lead you to where you want. But they're not just there to tell you what to do or to manipulate your world. They're there to support you. And I know that's a big difference from maybe what a lot of other people say, but I have had a lot of guides that have talked through me through the years. And I know that we dealt in a level of guides. I guess we demanded that, I'm not sure. Because I know Rama was leading them all for the early years. And we demanded a kind of a caliber of guide. So And I want you to realize, as I said, this one that came in and told this lady off, like began to tell her off. I'd had that once before, actually. I had it twice, and both times they were yanked out of me when they were not respectful. So guides tend to love you, care about you, and are respectful. Does that answer that, Shannon?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. You got another question for me?
I wrote something else
You
here.
usually do, so.
Yeah. Yeah. I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, I think you kind of were starting to talk about how some guides will come in or out of your life at
Yes.
certain junctures. So like,
Yes.
does our kind of team or our lineup kind of change
Well,
depending on where we are in our life?
that's true. Where you are, like, what can your spiritual essence, we'll say the inner core of you, where is that in relation to guides? I mean, I knew nothing about guides when I first started at all. But I was always aware I started off teaching meditation and psychic development. And there was always this person that sat in the middle of my circle, but higher in sort of a vibration. Found out later, he kind of oversaw that, made sure that everything was good and everything was working. And then as I began to grow, he was replaced by another guide. And that guide and I worked more. I got more when I say it, I got more inspirational instruction. I got much more kind of clear on things. And then eventually that guide came, actually in a meditation, came to me and said, I'm going to go and help a person that I knew, and I'm taking you to meet. And that's when he took me to meet Rama. And Rama definitely, Rama was hard. Rama did not excuse me of anything. He was a teacher for sure. And when I mean, because, you know, I mean, I was a bit of a rebel in lots of ways, and I would get kind of, what are you doing? When I say they're not supposed to instruct, sometimes Rama did, but not in a way, you got to do this, this, and this. It's like, what are you wanting? What are you wanting to achieve here? And not always, and not said necessarily in those words, but you got the message. You know what I mean? And it's like, are you here to become all you can be, or are you wanting to go off and play and have fun? Which I did anyway. So, but yeah, so, and then when I got ill, as I said, and I became clear, I couldn't do the work that I was doing before with Rama, or to the intensity. And then it made room for other guides that were to come in as well. So you're not ever left alone. There's always a team. Some of us have bigger teams than others, that's all. Or people to call on, you know. Okay.
Norma, can you hear me?
Yes.
Nawaz.
Oh, hi, Nawaz.
I just don't know how to open that other
That's
thing.
okay. I can hear you. That's all you got to do.
Okay. So this past weekend, I was at someone's house and they were practicing their hypnotherapy session because they're trying to take some courses.
Yeah.
And the weirdest thing is, this is the other thing I don't understand, is when they're in hypnotherapy, how do I know it's my higher self talking and not just my mind? Could shed some light on that?
Well, were you put under?
I think so,
Did they
because
hypnotize you?
Because I fell asleep for a long time, she said.
Oh,
and
well,
then I started to
when
talk.
when you fall asleep, it means your consciousness is not holding on to it. And it's like when you fall asleep, see, the key is to learn how to stay conscious when you're involved in a whole different, in some of these energies. And meditation helps you with that, where you can stay conscious while you can sort of operate on two levels, that kind of thing. I can't tell you, because if you don't know what exactly was said or was happening, I can't tell you if it was your high self. All I know is if there was orders, it was either sometimes high selves are not as evolved as we like to think they are. That's my personal understanding of what I've run into. But your mind usually regurgitates what it knows. So usually if you're finding something, it's something you've either thought of before or that you believe or think. Okay?
Because when one of the questions was naming the guide,
Yeah.
that name came up, Rama.
Okay. Well, good. The key is with often guides don't you, unless it was just you and the therapist, they don't usually give a name of the guide to publicly. It's what I've found.
It was just the two of us.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. You can't go wrong with that. I'm sure there's many aspects of Ramas too. But if you've got Rama as a guide, you're not going to go wrong there. I'll say
Okay.
that. You helped me tremendously over the years.
How do I call on him or feel
Or
him or
just
know him?
mentally, just open up and say, Rama, come talk to me. I found that he wasn't always there because he's busy. But excuse my nose again. But it's again, it's building up that confidence. It's all about you finding you. It's not about you relying on a guide. It's not about you needing whatever. It's about you knowing who you are. That's
I just
their
want to
job.
know if it's him or if it's just my own mind regurgitating. How would I know that?
As I said, your own mind will only ever regurgitate what it knows. Something you've read, something you've put in there, something that you believe.
Does he leave some kind of a sign or some kind of something
You can
to
ask
say
for
it's
that.
him?
You can ask for that.
Okay. Thanks, Norma.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we got time for one more. Anybody else? Otherwise, we're going to click off for today and be back next week. Our last of this 10 series that I've done. And I think all of you are on my email list. And those who would like to get on my email list, it's norma.cowie@gmail.com, or you can access to myself or the book that I talked about through my website, www.normacowie.com. Thank you.
Where can we get the book?
Through the website or through you, because you're close to me, live close to me, through me. Okay?
Okay. Thanks so much, Norma.
Righto. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.